introduction, I was thinking about how we build our calendar events and how Joanne Serling ended up here in Norwich, other than the fact that she's got friends here. Is what happened is in December, right before the crazy Christmas rush, and 2 major storms then wrecked our holiday schedule and store opening and everything. I got an email from Rachel Molland, who is a publicist, asking if we were interested in a, quote, a stunning debut, the only, in all caps, fiction we felt rose to the quality of the 12 list for 2008. So basically, how can I say no? So she wrote in addition that Joanne had friends in the area. So we did a little back and forth with dates, and by January 11th, we confirmed the date. So it's an ongoing process to try and figure out getting people here and who works. And we're happy we made it. Thank you. Especially with the weather. Joanne Serling is a graduate of Cornell University, and she studied and taught fiction at the Writers' Studio in New York City. And her fiction has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and she's appeared in the New Ohio Review and the North American Review. She lives outside of New York, so had to come through some major weather with her husband and children, and I hear is at work on her second book. So just a brief quote. Publishers Weekly wrote, "While many novels have tackled the subject of suburban secrets and unease, Good Neighbors excels, in particular, at exploring the bonds among families." Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out and braving the elements. I feel really lucky to be here. This was something I really wanted to do, is come up to this community. I've visited a few times. Tamar and Justin live here, and I love the Upper Valley, and I'm really grateful to be here. This book was a labor of love. I always wanted to write a novel. I had been working on short stories when this idea came to me, and I wrote in secret for about 6 months before I brought it to my writing group. I have a dedicated writing group in New York. And right away, they were enthusiastic, but they wanted more. I should start by saying I thought it would be a short story, but I hoped it could be a novel, and their enthusiasm is what kept me going when I grew it to 90 pages and then shrunk it to 40 pages and then grew it to 120 pages and then threw up my hands and said, how am I going to finish this? And they kept me going. So to those of you who are writers, you need people that keep pushing you. And what I hope, since this is a small group, is we could have a conversation about writing and the novel, and I could start by reading a little bit from it, and then feel free to ask me anything. And I need my glasses at this stage in my life. So, Good Neighbors is about 4 families who believe that they're such close friends, they refer to each other that they're like family. And I'm sure many people have friends like that. But like many neighbors, they don't really know that much about each other, and they're comfortable with certain secrets. And into their lives comes an adopted girl. One of the families adopts a 4-year-old from Russia, and that creates a gigantic conflict because adopting a child from Russia is more difficult than the neighbors realize, and the neighbors who adopt her seem like perhaps they may not have the best character. But we don't know. So I'm going to start with the prologue and then read a little bit of the first chapter. And before you fear that that's just so much time that you have to listen, the chapters are very short and very episodic. And that was on purpose as a way for me to get in and out very quickly and not feel intimidated, and because I really wanted to mimic a style of a book called Mrs. Bridge by Evan S. Connell. He does it better, but this was my attempt. So the prologue, which introduces the group, is called What We Thought We Knew. We knew we lived on the nicest street in the nicest neighborhood in Fairlawn, a neighborhood with views of a golf course, grand houses, wide open sidewalks. We knew we were never going to be the kind of parents our parents had been, hopelessly authoritarian, yet clueless and also uninterested in parenting. We knew that no matter what kind of parents we were, our children would most likely suffer from our mistakes and good intentions, or disappoint us. They would never be as smart or as swift or as popular as we imagined we had been. That they would very likely never grow up to live in a neighborhood quite as nice as this one. Our good fortune as much of a blessing as it was a mystery to us, born of hard work and birth order and a kind of easygoing luck that we were the first to acknowledge having benefited from. Our luck carrying us to the street at the same time, at the same stage in our lives, when our children were 2 and 1, and some of them infants. We knew that we would never have been friends if we didn't live on the same street at the same time with kids the same age. But we were happy to have found each other, to have discovered each other's good-natured camaraderie, eager to watch our kids play freeze tag, eager to share cocktails on a Saturday night, to throw pool parties in heat waves and make chili during snowstorms. We knew that we knew almost nothing about each other that we didn't want known, but the things we knew drew us closer. We hated strivers, abhorred social climbers, were impartial to religion, yet felt obligated to carry on the traditions we'd been brought up with, some of us Jewish, the rest of us Catholic. We were modest, we were moneyed, we were all of us self-made and the most successful siblings of our respective families, a fact we laughed about as soon as we knew each other well enough to admit it. That our extended families weren't as smart or as kind or as socially mobile as we were. More serious issues didn't get mentioned, but nonetheless trailed us. Perverted uncles, troubled sisters, brothers who were white-collar criminals. The weight of the secrets pressing us deeper and closer together. We were eager for each other's friendship and reassurance, convinced that our friends could do for us what our spouses were supposedly doing but simply couldn't, alleviating the boredom and the isolation of middle age, helping us to navigate this strange furlough called parenthood. Feathers. Paige insisted on buying Indian headdresses, faux leather bands, intricate beading, dyed and colored feathers. They were hideous, impractical, quite possibly racist. Still, I defended her. It's cultural, I told Lorraine when she called to complain about them. How are presents at Thanksgiving cultural? I don't know, maybe it's a Christian thing, like a stocking stuffer. Silence from Lorraine, who was Jewish and didn't know from stocking stuffers, aware that I didn't either. Who cares, I asked, gesturing towards Lorraine on the phone, even though I knew she couldn't see me. Lorraine, no doubt pacing her office, her team of admins pretending not to hear her through the glass-walled partition. Not that it mattered. Lorraine, a trim, athletic blonde with the kind of freckled face and easy demeanor that made everyone like her, no matter how much she gossiped. It's rude, for starters, Lorraine said. Now we all have to chip in $40 for a stupid gift that our kids don't want and don't need. It's a neighborhood leftovers party in a cabin in a park. The whole idea was not to spend money. They could put on a skit while we're eating, I offered, walking toward my front hall mirror to examine myself, my dirty blonde ringlets mashed against the side of my face, my green eyes staring back at me skeptically. It's just so Paige. Who buys a group gift without asking first? Let's just forget it, and next year we'll make sure she doesn't do anything without permission, I suggested, idly fluffing my hair with my fingers before walking away from the mirror and heading up to my second-floor office. That's what you said last year, Lorraine reminded me. And Paige brought the washable window paint. Remember the lost security deposit? It was true. I had said that. She had done that. But what did it matter, really? Paige Edwards was unpredictable. Lorraine Weinberger was bossy. And Nayla Guzman Viñero could barely acknowledge us, claiming to be too exhausted from her job as a corporate lawyer in Boston, happy to leave the socializing to her husband Drew, who owned a baseball card store on Main Street. He was more one of us than she was. Sort of. Not really. But we didn't care. We cared, but we'd made a trade-off, to accept everyone as they were in exchange for the comfort of the group's camaraderie. That's what we were now, a group, a thing, a neighborhood clique, the kind of friends who made up holidays to celebrate together, like this one, Leftovers Day, a senseless ritual that made us feel like we belonged to one another. Lorraine needed to drop the headdress complaint, not because Paige was right, but because being right was besides the point. Just be overly solicitous when she presents the gift, then dump it in the trash as soon as you get home, I said, turning on my computer. The whir making me feel productive, even though I'd quit my corporate job 4 years earlier, my desk cluttered with bills and paperwork instead of writing assignments. Lorraine laughed. Lorraine said, I just don't understand her. I agreed. I commiserated. I said, I know what you mean, even though I didn't. Not really. Paige wasn't a mystery to me. I understood Paige in my own peculiar and hard-to-explain way. Her dramatic flair and self-deprecating humor, her silk scarves and handsomely furnished tutor. Hers was a life that functioned perfectly, as long as people didn't know her well, or didn't question her. I didn't question her. I didn't look too closely. Her fights with other people were ceaseless and comical. The rookie cop who pulled her over for speeding. The naive mother who accidentally cut Paige off in the car wash driveway. Paige, always eager to tell us about these incidents, always eager to explain how awful the other party had been. And in the telling, I'd shake my head, I'd murmur support, I'd pretend to understand her side of the story. But I always knew the other side, too, could always feel the crevice where the rest of the information lay. In my ear, Lorraine was saying, we didn't even tell her to buy a group gift this year. Did you tell Paige to buy a group gift? Well, I didn't say she couldn't buy a group gift, I offered, hoping this would make Paige's transgression all right, forgivable, at least to Lorraine. It was already forgivable to me in the way that all acts that weren't deadly, and even some that were, could be made forgivable by me. So, I'm open to any question. No question is stupid. Anyone?
So I'm curious about the first-person perspective and the other characters. Did you always live in this character, or did you have to play with that to settle on where you were?
Such a good question, thank you. Originally the book was sort of a hodgepodge of the narration from the prologue, which was this we voice, sometimes breaking into the I, but not really clear. And I think because I secretly wanted to have this big third person that you see in a lot of Victorian novels, but didn't really feel confident for that. So I adopted this, what they call second person we. And actually it was our very own Tamar Schreibman who read 30 pages when I was thinking, you know, should I keep going in this agent search, what's happening? And she pointed out that the narration wasn't exactly consistent. And I went back in and moved everything into a more definitive I, which presented problems because I'd had this mobile narrator that could tell you what other people were thinking, and the I can no longer do that, but gave me a great opportunity to reveal the person telling the story and really play with that staccato rhythm of the sentences to reveal the I more fully. I hope that makes sense.
But I really love the prologue, which I didn't care until I think it was already, or maybe I only read it when it was published. But I love the honesty and the self-awareness of the group, and they're so clear-headed about what they're, as a group, looking for in a life in the suburbs, and clear about their own families. I really admire it, and I also know the story. I think people would like it of how you have the idea and the creative voice for that prologue.
So I had this wonderful writing group that had seen this in succession, and there was sort of a split in the writing group about whether I could just start with the first chapter or I needed to set it up. And my feeling was it needed to be set up, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I would bring draft after draft, and everything was boring, and there was published novelists in my group who said, don't do it, it's not working, and then there was other published people who said, I really want you to read how this writer does it. I read it, I couldn't figure it out, I was stuck, The book was done. I had done everything I could. I had worked on it intensely during the month of July and August while my kids were away, and I was getting ready to ship it to agents, and I was driving back from Trader Joe's to my house, and it was like a song in my head started to play with this narration about what we thought we knew. Well, it was what we knew. And I thought, if you don't pull over right now and write this down, you're going to lose this. I pulled over to the side of the road, I got on my phone, and it was like it existed. I just needed to take the notes. And I never believed it when writers said that, but that was really what it was. And I think it was because I had spent so much intense time rewriting the book and thinking about it that, you know, my unconscious served it up to me and it was ready to go. So thanks. That was the hardest part to come up with, and the funnest part once it was most fun once it was ready.
So when you're not like having a moment of inspiration and pulling over, what is your like writing? Like, do you have a
I
strict
do.
writing schedule? And like,
I do, but it's not as strict as, you know, all those books say, because, you know, for a long time I would read, you know, Jeffrey Eugenides goes in a room for 8 hours a day. He doesn't leave, even if he only writes one page. I would be miserable. I was miserable. I tried that one summer. I cleared my schedule just to write. I couldn't write a word. That doesn't work for me. So my schedule is, I have kids, I get them to school, I immediately do something physical if I can. It's not like I love going to the gym, but I do something physical because it gets me out of my head, and I'm a very cerebral person. And then when I get back from that, I feel free, like I can take chances, and it's just playing, and I write, and I don't look at my email, I don't clean the kitchen, I don't do the laundry, I don't return phone calls, and I don't answer my phone. And if you know me well and you call me before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it better be an emergency, because I'm assuming it's an emergency. Because, you know, once you answer the phone, you're sort of out of it. And it's like, who doesn't want to stop writing? I want to stop writing. It's really hard. But once I got into the rhythm of doing that every day, and I would go so for a year and a half I went to the same place at the Montclair Library in New Jersey, and there was a lot of kooky people there. It's where I started it, and the kooky people gave me a lot of freedom, like listening to them, and again, feeling like it was playful. And then I spent two years about at my kitchen table. I got a new table, and I really liked the table, so I moved from the library to the table. But I'm pretty disciplined with a sense of play.
disciplined about time or disciplined about how much?
Disciplined about my process. So I think I don't know how many people here are writers, but you have to know your own process. And for a long time I was thinking I had to have someone else's process. So I'd read a book about writing and think, oh, well, that has to be my process. Robert Olin Butler wrote a book, You Can Never Take a Day Off in a Book. If you go on vacation, you have to write every day. My kids were like 5 and 2 when I read that book. I was not going to go to the beach and write for 2 hours a day. Like, I could barely keep up with my kids and the rental and the activities. So I found what worked for me. And what works for me is writing in a certain place, writing at a certain time, knowing I can't go into the email and the social media or that knocks me out. And for me, I also got a job. I needed a job where I felt creative and productive and good at it, so that on the days when the writing didn't go well, I wouldn't feel like my whole life was riding on it.
What was your job?
I got a job running probably the last glossy magazine in America. It was this beautiful color magazine in the suburb just next to mine. And it's a fairly affluent suburb, Short Hills, New Jersey, and my job, couldn't believe people were going to pay me for this, was to go into the biggest, fanciest homes and interview the owners about their lifestyle and their homes and their decor, and and run the other features and meet all the people and write profiles about other successful people. And I met amazing people and got out of my life, and it was a skill I had come from publishing. I have a good friend who's a writer. She finds that horrific to have to work. She likes having the freedom to go on walks and sleep late and take naps. That's what feeds her creativity. So you have to know what works for you. I like to feel busy and a little bit stressed. Just a tiny bit. Justin?
Joanne. Why do you think that this was your first book? I mean, when you opened, you talked about maybe it was a short story, maybe it was a novel. So why did it become a novel, and why do you think it was this story? Like, was there something about this story,
Yes.
or was at the time in your life? I mean, you talked about, kids are 5 and 2, and you clearly had different times in your life when you could treat this in a different way. And I'm wondering if it was this story or this time or the combination that sort of allowed you to produce this.
That's a great question. I think it was both. I had been writing short stories about motherhood and about groups. My first short story was about a group and you don't know who's telling the story. So I have a natural interest in groups. I'm always in groups. I'm very interested in group behavior and the way people compromise themselves to fit into the group, and the way some people need groups and some people reject groups. So that was material. I also grew up in the suburbs, but I did not grow up in an affluent suburb. My parents divorced. At the time, nobody divorced. So, I moved to New Jersey. It was not that familiar, even though it was a suburb. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. These people had some definite ideas about how you live a certain life in the suburbs outside of New York, and they seemed to have a lot of rules about a lot of things. And it was fascinating to me. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. So I think, and then I got this job where I got to go into people's homes, and it fed this sort of obsession. So certainly if I wasn't a mother and I wasn't raising kids, I wouldn't have stumbled across the material and the idea, but I think it was central to who I was as a person to try and understand what it meant to be a contemporary woman and mother, and trying to grapple with good enough parenting versus abuse, and the influences of social class and race and all the things all of us are thinking about every day, but for me felt even more urgent because I had grown up in an environment that was so different. Even though now, so many people grow up like that, in 1970 that was weird. Does that answer you?
Yeah, but so what made it a novel? Because you just had so much. You had a story that you wanted to tell that took longer than.
That's a good question. So I brought the short story and I was like, wow, this came really fast. And then my group had a lot of questions. They wanted to know all of the fathers. They had questions about, not just the mothers. They had so many questions. And in the past, if someone asked me that many questions, I might have said, yeah, I don't know. This is the world of the story. But I knew. And I had more things I wanted to say that I hadn't realized. So I guess that's the benefit of having a group that kind of can push you a little. I had more to say.
And was that the first time you were in that kind of context, or was that the first time you had more to say? Like, why didn't other stories turn into novels?
Oh, I was further along, I think, as a writer. I understood not as much as I needed to, but I understood more about writing. Writing is one of those things like swimming or yoga. You just keep doing it, and if you accrete a little bit more knowledge along the way. So I was a little better writer. And I had this idea. I had a bigger idea. I had written 3 novels that sat in a drawer. But I didn't care about them in the same way, or I didn't have the courage, maybe, to care about them. There's a combination when you write. Sometimes you hit up against material and you think, oh, I can't say that. Sometimes you just think, I don't know what I want to say. So I'd always been very ambitious, and I would write these big, long ambitious and talkative, maybe. I just had these big, long manuscripts in the drawer, but I knew they weren't novels. And I would say to finish a novel, you have to be so in love with your characters and so passionate about this world. It's like being in love. You want to spend all of your time with them, thinking about them for years. Well, I spent about 2 years on the draft, but lest that scare you, I was working part-time, I was raising my kids, and I was purposely going slow. I knew it would kill me if I wrote more than a few hours a day. I wanted to feel like excited to go back to it every day. Then I tried to find an agent, and I couldn't. Then I was stuck and depressed. Then I couldn't stand being stuck anymore, and I just started to write some more, and then that was terrible, but that sometimes writing terrible things pushes you back. So the whole process from start to publication was 7 years. But I wasn't writing every day, but I always felt I could sit down and I was in it. I was in this world, and it was like a great song in my head. I always wanted to hear it.
Are you in another one?
I might be, actually. I might be. It's like magic. You don't know if the door is going to open or shut. So I'm waiting to see. I feel confident that maybe.
So when Tamara told me about this, I went and got the book on Audible. That was just an easy way for me to.
You're the
get up to-
Audible person.
Yes, and she told me that you were in love with the narrator that was chosen. I did love the book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for it. And I was definitely immersed in it, and I'm just curious about that process of finding the narrator, and if the author is ever involved in that process, how much?
So I was not involved, and I actually have a woman in my book group who works for Audible. So I found out later that often publishers will come to an author and present 2 or 3 narrators. My publisher, Hachette Book Group, is the one publisher that doesn't use Audible, and maybe because of that, they don't really care what we think. I was not consulted. I was not even told there was an audiobook. It's a little bit of a murky process when you're the author. You're just supposed to be creatively hanging out there while they make these business decisions. I've gotten some readers saying they like the narrator, so who am I to say? It just wasn't my vision.
She's grown up.
Yeah, what do you think?
Tamara's one of the book. Sounds good. Then I, push the.
She's grown on you?
That's how I felt.
She's grown on me, for sure, and I'm not finished. But yeah, and then to hear you read it, it's so different.
You know, we're all gonna have to go to
I know.
Audible.
And you hear things differently, you pick up on different things just from, that chapter in the prologue.
And it
I
could.
love the style, though. The style of the writing is what really drew me in, and I feel like I could overlook the narrator, and just knowing that you weren't a fan of it actually helped me, because I just felt like I was more connected to the book rather than I was able to overlook the narration.
Right, like if I had liked that narration, that would really say something about me. She reads it just for the people who haven't heard it in a very high-pitched, excited tone, and every moment she's excited. There's no, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think, she's equally excited about everything, this narrator, and the hysteria is different than the hysteria I wanted to put in it. It doesn't, when your book goes in the world, it's not yours anymore. So that's how that reader felt about my book, and that's her prerogative.
You talked about when you pulled over and wrote down because of the song, and that it was just there in your consciousess. And as you were taking the journey of the writing, did you have a vision for the ending? Did it surprise you? Were you pleased with the ending? Did you learn something new from it?
I definitely did. Thank you. Believe it or not, I originally thought this was going to be a story about a neighbor who mentors a girl, and she's so worried about the girl, and they meet up many years later, and the girl doesn't remember her, and the girl is fine. So my original vision was so completely different, because I really believed in resilience among children and imperfect parenting. As I wrote the book, that just felt so false. That may have been what I started with, but it wasn't true to the situation, and it wasn't even the main inquiry of the book, which was more than just about this adopted girl and her fate. Did I mention there's an adopted girl? But also about the friends and the role of community, and that became bigger. When I sold the book, it had a completely different ending. And my agent liked the ending, but I wasn't sure. I'd heard from a lot of writer friends they didn't love the ending, and I'd heard from a lot of agents they didn't love the ending. My agent loved it. She bought the book. She went out with it. The book did not sell on the first round, which is common. It's not a big deal. I get very hysterical, and I said I'm changing the ending because I had more data than she did, because I'd been out in the market hearing from people. So the original ending is equally ambiguous. You don't necessarily know the true story, but it didn't have enough fictional technique to give the reader a sense of completion, was how I felt. It was a year since I'd written it. And again, you keep growing as a writer, and so by that point, I was still writing and doing things and reading and thinking, and I thought, I have more skills now, and I can make this like a more fulsome ending without giving up my point of view. It still ends ambiguously, but more, with, I hope, a more fulsome completion. Liza.
Was adoption always the catalyst for the crisis?
Originally, very quickly, yes. Originally, I just thought the girl's troubled, the neighbor wants to save her. It's about the neighbor having this savior fantasy and the girl being resilient. But pretty quickly, I thought, well, adoption would work well, because I knew the narrator was a bit of an outsider. She felt like a stranger in a strange land, not unlike me. What would make her so attracted to this girl? She's got 2 kids of her own in the book. Well, the adoption is a good device. And I personally have always been interested in adoption, and I've read a ton of articles not so dissimilar from this. There was a boy in Texas, his name was Max Chateau, and he died under mysterious circumstances in his backyard. He was adopted, and everyone accused the mother that there was foul play, and you can imagine her horror at being accused of killing her adopted son. And so articles like that were in my consciousness and helped form the story.
I have another process question. I got to experience you going through this whole process through Tamar.
Yeah.
Because you guys would talk, and then I would say, you know, what do you do today? Oh, I talked to Joanne, and I got like the whole
Hours.
Yeah, hours, exactly. But one of the things that was, and this is because I don't know, I've never published a book, but I was so surprised that like you wrote a book, you got a publisher, and I was like, that's done. But then it was so interesting to hear like how much work and how much stress and struggle you had to put into this book after it was ostensibly done and it had a publisher. So like, how does that work? Like, what drives the changes, and what role does the editor and the other people play in sort of taking the book across the finish line?
So, just backing up even a step from that, when your agent goes to sell your book, you actually are interviewed and interview editors who are interested to find a match. Because if they don't feel like you have what it takes to make their changes, or you don't like them and don't want to take their changes, it's not going to work. It's, you know, a very personal relationship. So I had 2 of those calls, and one, even though she was very interested, I just had like a bad instinct. I didn't feel like I could work with her. And the other one, we had a great call, and she seemed to get me more. So I trusted her with the kinds of changes she would want, and we sort of both agreed that the weakness in the book was that, well, what I thought was maybe the characters, some of the women weren't differentiated enough, and what she came up with, because she was a great editor, when we went through the edits, was you need to lose a friend. She's not contributing to this narrative. And you can have 4 friends in a book, but not 5. It's too many. People can't follow, because every friend comes with a family, especially in this book. Not always, but in this book they did, and there was just too many characters. So she gives you the big picture, you know, that you've kind of agreed on up front, that, yeah, we're going to make the characters more differentiated. Her ideas for doing it are up to you. Like, do you agree that you can get rid of this whole family? And I immediately said, oh my God, that's genius. Why did nobody think of that? Because she's the book editor. And then lots of little turning points along the way that she wanted to strengthen, things that she knows about as an editor that I have a different focus as a writer. And so it's very collaborative. We went back and forth several times. And then and I found out since this is common, I'm a writer and can't let it go. I had so many changes I wanted to make. Now it's, you know, 6 months since the last round of changes when I've given it to my agent. I'm no longer satisfied with some of the characters, some of the story arcs, and I want to make changes, and I run them by her, and she says, let's see what it looks like. So it's that whole process. Then you're slated for publication, and you've got to get ready to be your own publicist. And that is unfortunately the name of the game, and that's what I'm really involved in now, like 3 or 4 hours a day. Thinking of ways to get attention for the book and supplement what my publicist has done, because on the day your book comes out, 6 other books come out too. So how are you going to stand out? And maybe you won't, but you want to try. Does that answer?
Yeah.
How do you know when it's done? I mean, you know, your editor suggested changes and you made changes and then you made further ones. How do you, is there a point you just have to say, I've got to stop, or?
I think there's a feeling in you. So when I sent it out to the agents, I didn't necessarily think it was done, the second round of agents, but I felt I'd taken it as far as I could take it without professional feedback. And I knew that from other friends that was good enough. And it took me a while. I'll tell a funny story. Tamar helped me a lot during this process. You have to have writer friends, or you just would pull your hair out. And I was getting so many good reads from agents and lots of feedback, and that was a good sign, but no one had taken the book. And one day I got feedback from an agent, a very big commercial agent, and she said, wow, I really love this. At first I thought you were going to be the next Leanne Moriarty, but no, you're not. I found this too thin. And I called, do you remember this? I called Tamar and I said, who's Leanne Moriarty? I wasn't in the commercial fiction world. I had my head down on this book. I was constantly reading things that would help me with this book. She's just a different genre of writer. So Tamara said, I'm actually reading her right now. I think you should read it, and then we'll, whatever. I went back to this agent, and she said, what I want is, I would think of representing you if you gave every character, you know, and she basically outlined how I could make the book more like Leanne Moriarty. That wasn't my vision, so I wasn't going to do that. So the things I wanted to do were about completing my emotional journey and my vision for this book. And when I felt like I had professional help from my agent and my editor to get all of that on the page. I knew it was done. But some of it is just trusting yourself also.
But do you feel like there's an alternate reality where this fifth friend lives on? And like someday tell the story of that person?
No, because the problem with this fifth friend is she didn't have a role. She was just, she wasn't doing anything, but I couldn't see that. I mean, when you write a novel, you're juggling so many balls, and what I hadn't realized is that she was like here, the first half of the narrative, and then I had this other friend here. Why did I have two different friends? What were they doing? This isn't real life. This is a novel, and in the world of the novel, whatever happens, the gun goes off, someone's carrying a gun in scene 1, it better go off by the end. This woman showed up in scene 1, and then she disappeared. That might happen in your life, but that doesn't happen in a novel.
But at least you didn't have to kill her off. She just sort of disappeared.
I tried giving her like different backstories that would tie it together. What was she doing there? She wasn't doing anything. And that's where I say, I think I've learned what I should have known when I started it. It's really good to be foolish when you start a book and a little bit grandiose, because otherwise you just would never survive it.
If I'm going back to the agent who wanted you to have the voice of another author, did you find that often? I mean, why can't you have your own voice?
She just wanted me to have the structure and the story and the characters of that other author. She was okay with my voice. Because she wanted to make money. How do you make money? Someone's selling Coke, you sell Pepsi. If I could have done it, I might have, but it was like I didn't even like the book. I mean, I loved the series, don't get me wrong. But the book was not what I wanted to write. It happened to be about women, and they happened to have kids, and that was about where the similarity ended. But sometimes you have to listen. You have to like read the tea leaves. What are all these people saying in common that this book is missing? And do I want to make that change? Because 45 rejections, that's a lot of rejection.
Oh. Well, now you can go to them and say, see? Is that commonplace?
Yeah.
Yeah. For a new one.
I actually had a few other agent offers. So I did have, I had one agent offer I didn't want because she didn't have the list I wanted. I knew how I wanted the book sold, and she wasn't going to sell it in a literary way, and I just thought she wasn't going to get the job done. I'd had friends who had agents that didn't sell books, and I'd had a nonfiction book that didn't get sold. So it was a little bit careful. And then I had another agent that wanted me to rewrite some things, and she had some good ideas, and while I was mulling that over, my agent signed me, and I had the opportunity to go back to agent number 2 and say, I already got someone.
I have just one more.
Yeah.
Now that you've sold this, will you try and go back and sell the nonfiction book? Or
No.
No.
That was never my passion. That was like my job. Like I got the job as the editor. That nonfiction book was like a job while I was writing also short stories. Because I come from a publishing background, and that's kind of, I can do that pretty easily. But it's not my passion.
You said that now this phase is about getting the book out there and getting people to know about it. And do you like this part as well? I mean, I know that it's a very, I have a lot of friends who are artists, and they like doing art, but they aren't good at selling their art, and it's a very different part of the brain. And then there are people who are good at both and enjoy both.
I don't hate it, I don't like it. I'm a very practical person. I had a job, I worked in PR, I understand what I have to do. Lately I've been carving out time when I can just write, because otherwise I feel really empty at the end of the day. You know, even though I've checked 15 boxes and gotten the book out to 3 podcasts, that's not what feeds my soul, and I didn't become a writer just to like check off boxes, even though I'm efficient and I can do it. And it's depressing sometimes.
Is it fun sometimes?
Is it fun? I mean, if you're someone who likes to check boxes, I do. It's mainly fun when people read the book. I guess what I've learned is anytime I read a book I like now, I'm going to write to that author. It just makes your whole day. You think they don't care? I have this one woman, she sent me the nicest email, and I just think of her sometimes when I have a bad day. So that's the best part.
We'll write to you.
Yeah, feel free, my email's on my site. Oh, Liza.
One more process question. I really like the cover, and I'm wondering how much input you had on that.
So the publisher's great about taking input on covers, but I didn't have too much. I should also mention my editor left, right? This is a crazy world. Right when we were done with the edits, the book was ready to go into production. She was offered a more senior position, and she left the publisher, and I had the option of having her buy out my contract and taking me with her, or staying where I was. I said, my agent decided I should stay, fine. So now I had a new editor, and he sent me this cover, and I loved it. And I thought, is this normal? Like, I love this cover. I had one small change. We weren't able to make it because of a Photoshop issue. We tried for like 6 months, and we couldn't do it, and I said, I'm going to live with it. And he loved it, I loved it, the sales force loved it. It was just, a home run for all of us. But I am in a group on Facebook with lots of other authors, and they get 3 or 4 passes, and they don't always like them. I got lucky, I guess, or I am just a pushover.
It just fits the book so well.
I thought so. I thought, wow, this designer really got my book.
And the title, did that come to you quickly?
No, I'm horrible at titles. Ready to laugh? This book was called Notes on How to Behave with an Adopted Child. I knew it was terrible, but it kept me focused. The second round of agents, I came up with What We Thought We Knew, and I got the agent with that, and she said very gently to me, your book is a lot better than What We Thought We Knew. Could you give that up? And I said, sure, you can send me some titles. I'm going to embarrass Tamar again. She sent me 2 different titles, and I guess I, was in a mood, and I was like, oh, Good Neighbors, that's like an insurance commercial. And I called Tamar, because that's who I call, and she was like, Good Neighbors, it's like the Robert Frost poem. Oh, thank God I have literary friends. And I looked at the Robert Frost poem. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it talks about whether good fences make good neighbors, which was so at the heart of my book. And I thought, wow, my agent's really, she's pretty smart, and so is Tamar, and I've been really happy ever since I gave up the insurance illusion. And I put What We Thought We Knew into the prologue, and it all worked out. So all of you writers out there, just do it. It's not like, you need to know anything special. You just have to be stupid and keep plowing forward.
Are you doing other bookstores and venues, and how are
Some.
you finding that?
I love it. I mean, you work alone at your kitchen table for 7 years. It's nice to get out. I'm going up to my hometown next weekend and doing a lot of media up there. I'm from Rochester, New York, and doing a Barnes & Noble reading, and I'm really excited about that. And then the publisher feels like if you're going to be somewhere, let them know, and they'll try and set something up for you, but they don't, unless you're like, Oprah author, they don't really send you on tour. That's a myth. Thank you so much. I had such a great time. Thank you, Liza, for having me.
Have we got your here. Thank you.
It's really a lot of fun. You're a great audience. Thank you.